Why is she even still alive? That's what I heard, sharp, whispered, but meant to wound, just as I stepped into my son's backyard carrying a casserole dish. My feet froze, the foil trembling under my fingers. Laughter followed, careless and cruel, as if I weren't even there. For a moment I thought maybe I'd misheard, maybe the words weren't meant for me. But when I looked around, nobody met my eyes. Not my son, not his wife, not even my grandchildren. I was invisible in a place I had built with my own sacrifices. And that was the moment everything inside me shifted. The moment my life split in two, before those words and after. That's where my story begins. The casserole dish was hot against my palms, still radiating the weight of an oven I had preheated too early because I was nervous about being late. I wanted everything to look right. The top layer of cheese had blistered into a golden crust, the kind of thing people at potlucks used to ask me for the recipe to. I held it steady, thinking, this will be my way in. This will be the bridge. The gate creaked as I pushed it open. It stuck on swollen wood, then gave way with a sound like a sigh. The moment it swung wide, I heard it, quiet, not shouted, but clean enough to cut. Why is she even still alive? It was said like an aside, a throwaway, but it lodged in me like a thorn. Then came the laugh that followed. Small, tight, enough to slice. I stopped moving. The dish in my hands trembled under the foil, though my grip did not. I didn't step back, I stepped forward. The backyard was full of life, strung up with lights that had no reason to glow yet, tables sagging under paper plates and shiny bottles of beer. A speaker in the corner spat out music too fast for anyone my age to recognize. Children darted through the grass, squealing, weaving in and out of folding chairs like minnows in shallow water. The air smelled of meat fat hitting open flame and citronella candles trying, and failing, to chase away the mosquitoes. No one looked at me. I stood there a moment longer, holding the dish like it was a passport to a country that had stopped recognizing me as a citizen. My son, Keaton, was at the grill, broad shoulders, beard trimmed sharp, laughing with the men beside him as if they had always been his brothers. His wife, Tamsin, drifted among the women, smile practiced and bright, a glass of rosé always in hand. The house behind them was one I had poured money into when they couldn't afford the down payment. The walls were partly mine, but the yard made it clear I was a guest at best, an intruder at worst. Finally, a voice. "Oh, Greer, you came." It was Tamsin. She looked surprised, but not in a pleasant way. Her lips curved, but her eyes darted, already searching for an escape. "We weren't sure if you'd," she trailed off, then waved vaguely at the casserole. "Oh, you brought something." I lifted the dish an inch. "Rice bake, the one with peppers. A sound that meant nothing. "I'll tell Keaton you're here." And she was gone, moving toward the grill before I could add another word. I set the dish down at the farthest end of the last table, where an unopened bag of pretzels sat like a placeholder. The foil crinkled, releasing the smell of roasted cumin and cheese, but no one reached for a spoon. I pulled out a chair. It wobbled under me, the metal seam digging into the back of my thighs. Still, I sat straight as if posture could anchor me. The children tore past 3 times, water guns flashing, bare feet pounding the grass. Not once did they stop. Not once did they say, "Hi, Grandma." I wondered if they even recognized me without a grocery bag in hand, without the bribe of gummy worms zipped in plastic. At the grill, Keaton raised a beer and called out to family. His friends lifted theirs in response, the sound of aluminum cans clinking together carrying across the yard. Cheers erupted, glasses lifted, and in that moment, not one pair of eyes turned toward me. The word family hung in the air, weighty and false. I folded my hands in my lap. They didn't shake. I wanted to believe that was strength, not numbness. Tamsin passed by later, leaned down close enough for her perfume to brush against me. "Do you want anything to eat?" "I'm fine." She nodded too quickly, relieved to leave before conversation could root. So I stayed, I watched. I listened. I became a shadow at their gathering. The casserole cooled. The music grew louder. My back ached against the folding chair, but I kept sitting tall. I thought of all the years I had carried, given, bent myself small so they could stretch. The $40,000 pulled from my retirement account when they needed help buying this very house. The babysitting, the groceries slipped into their fridge without being asked. The nights alone, waiting for a call that never came. Now I was here, sitting at the edge of a table, hearing whispers about why I was even still alive. Keaton eventually made his way down the line. His smile was wide, rehearsed, the same one that charmed coaches and teachers decades ago. "Hey, Mom, you found us." "I did," I said. "Great, great, thanks for coming." He glanced at the casserole. His hand twitched toward it, then stopped. "Awesome, we've got plenty of food." "Yes," I said softly. "Plenty." Before I could add more, a child tugged at his shirt. "Dad, cake now." "Give me a sec, buddy." He ruffled the boy's hair, then turned back to me. "You good? I'm good." And he was gone again, swept into his own life as easily as a leaf carried off by wind. The party carried on, plates filled and emptied. Someone told a joke I was the punchline to without realizing it. More toasts followed, to new beginnings, someone said, and glasses clinked again. Each word stacked onto the others like bricks in a wall meant to shut me out. Still, I stayed. I helped fold napkins. I tied up a bag of trash that no one else bothered with. I wiped grease from the tables with the corner of a paper towel. Small acts that made me feel less disposable, even if nobody noticed. When the last slice of cake was gone, when the children were buckled into car seats, when the music clicked off, I picked up my casserole dish, now mostly untouched, the foil crumpled but still holding warmth from the sun. I carried it home, step by step, not angry, not even sad, but with something harder. A decision forming in my chest like a new bone. At my kitchen counter, under the dim light of the old fixture, I unwrapped the foil. I spooned out a portion for myself and ate it standing up. The rice was perfect, spiced, comforting, everything I had hoped someone else might taste and say thank you for. No one had, but I had. When the bowl was washed and set to dry, I took out a notebook from the drawer. On the first page, I wrote my son's name. Then, with a steady hand, I drew a single line through it. I closed the book and pressed my palm flat against the cover. This was the moment. The split before and after. I left when the yard was already thinning, when cars lined up in the driveway and the folding chairs were collapsing one by one. No one noticed me slip out, casserole dish clutched against my chest like a shield. The foil was crinkled, the glass heavy. It felt absurd to be carrying it, and yet I held on tight, because it was the only proof I had been there at all. The night air was thick with cut grass and leftover smoke from the grill. Each step down the sidewalk echoed like the tolling of a bell, steady, unflinching. I thought about how many times I had walked this same stretch, carrying groceries, carrying birthday gifts, carrying my whole self like an offering, and how often I had returned lighter, emptier, because nothing I brought was ever received the way I hoped. My shoes scuffed the pavement. Porch lights glowed from neighbors' homes, each one a reminder of families who might be laughing together inside, letting their mothers sit at the table without question. Mine, my own blood had asked why I was still alive. The question gnawed at me. Not because I didn't know the answer, I did. I had survived too much to doubt my own resilience, but because they saw me as a burden, a body taking up space, as if my life was an inconvenience to their curated happiness. I passed the maple tree on the corner where I once stood waiting for Keaton's school bus, clutching a thermos of cocoa so he'd be warm when the doors opened. I remembered his little hand in mine, sticky from a half-eaten Pop-Tart, the way he used to look at me like I was the center of his universe. I wondered when that gaze shifted away. Was it gradual, like a shadow moving across the lawn, or sudden like a door slammed shut? By the time I reached my own front steps, my arms ached from the weight of the dish. I unlocked the door, stepped into the stillness, and for a moment I just stood there, waiting for the quiet to confirm what I already knew. No one was following me home. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and the coffee I had brewed that morning. The silence was not new, but tonight it pressed differently, heavier, more deliberate. I set the casserole on the counter, peeled back the foil, and ate a spoonful standing up because there was no one to sit with, no one to serve. The rice was perfect, just as I'd made it 100 times before. But tonight it tasted of something else, finality. I washed the dish, dried it, and placed it in the cupboard. My hands lingered on the handle a beat longer, as if to tell it, we won't be going on that kind of trip again. Sleep came in pieces that night, broken by the words replaying in my head. Why is she even still alive? Every time I closed my eyes, the sentence came back sharper. I woke before dawn, restless, aching for clarity. I went into the kitchen, boiled water, and made coffee. Just 1 cup. Once, I would have brewed a whole pot, expecting company, neighbors, family, whoever might drop by. But I realized, staring at the steam rising, that I'd been living on expectation, not reality. I sat at the table, my hands around the mug, and thought about all the years I had shrunk myself to fit into the spaces they offered. I excused the unanswered calls. I forgave the birthdays they skipped. I told myself they're busy whenever a holiday passed with nothing but a text. I accepted less and less, as if love were a ration and I was lucky for the crumbs. That morning, the truth landed with a clarity I couldn't avoid. I had been waiting for them to choose me. Waiting for my son to notice, for my daughter-in-law to approve, for the grandchildren to remember. And in that waiting, I had forgotten I could choose myself. The thought was small, almost fragile, but it was mine. What if I stop waiting? I took another sip of coffee, bitter and strong, and felt it settle in me like a vow. Tomorrow I would start something different. Not for them, for me. It started with a drawer. Not a memory, not a confrontation, but a simple drawer in the hallway closet, the one that stuck every time I tried to open it. For years I told myself I'd organize it one day. That day arrived the morning after I realized I could no longer wait for someone else to choose me. The drawer groaned when I tugged it free. Inside, beneath an old scarf and a chipped tape measure, sat a box of files I had avoided. Receipts curled at the edges, tax returns bound with rubber bands gone brittle, mortgage statements, and handwritten notes in the margins where I had done the math 3 times just to be sure. I carried the box to the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once cut sandwiches into triangles for Keaton, the same table where birthday cakes cooled. I spread the papers out like puzzle pieces. For the first time, I wasn't looking at numbers. I was looking at a history of how I had poured myself into their lives. There was the down payment check, the largest I had ever written, so Keaton and Tamsin could buy their house. I remembered the way they hugged me, quick and distracted, already talking about paint colors. No one ever called it a gift. They called it help, as if help came without strings for them but wrapped in chains for me. There were grocery receipts from the months I quietly stocked their pantry. I could see the cereal boxes Ruby once begged for, the almond milk Tamsin insisted on, the frozen pizzas Keaton said he didn't like but devoured anyway. I never added it up then. I only added hope, that one day they would say, "We couldn't have done this without you." They never did. There was even the receipt from the hospital gift shop, a bouquet I bought for Tamsin after Ruby was born. I remembered how she barely glanced at it, exhausted but polite. The flowers wilted in the corner of their room while I held my granddaughter, my chest swelling with a love so fierce I thought it might redeem everything. For a while, I believed it had, but laid bare on my table, the papers told the truth. This wasn't generosity. This was bargaining. I gave because I thought love could be purchased in installments. I gave because I believed sacrifice would guarantee belonging. I pressed my palm flat against the spread of papers as if to steady myself. The truth burned. Love given as payment never returns. The audit wasn't only financial, it was personal. Every dollar I spent was a note in a silent plea. See me, need me, love me. And each time I received silence in return. My chest tightened, but not from regret, from clarity. I gathered the papers back into neat stacks, sliding them into folders labeled not with numbers but with words: house, food, holidays, silence. Each one told its own story, and together they formed the ledger of my life as their shadow. For years I had been balancing books that were never mine to balance. By the time the last folder was tucked away, my kitchen looked less like a mess and more like an office. I sat back in my chair, the morning light spilling across the table, and thought, this isn't an ending. This is an accounting. Not just of dollars, but of dignity. And dignity, once lost, must be reclaimed in deliberate steps. I never thought a phone call would change the direction of my life, but that morning it did. The receipts from the night before were still spread across my mind, even though I had tucked them into folders. Numbers, years, sacrifices, all of them gnawed at me. I realized if I kept them hidden, they'd keep owning me. What I needed wasn't another folder. I needed a witness. That's when I remembered Alina Cruz. We'd met years back through a church fundraiser. She was a probate lawyer then, sharp-eyed and direct, but she retired a while ago. We never became friends exactly, but we had exchanged holiday cards, and her number was still penciled in my old address book. I dialed, half expecting the line to be disconnected. Alina Cruz, she answered, voice firm, no nonsense, exactly as I remembered. Alina, it's Greer, I said, suddenly nervous. I have some questions. About papers, inheritance, and, well, family. She didn't ask why. She simply said, come tomorrow at 10, bring everything. The next morning I dressed as though I were attending a hearing of my own life, pressed slacks, blouse with real buttons, shoes polished even though no one else would notice. My hands shook, but not with fear, with intent. Alina's home was tidy in a way that suggested discipline, not decorating. The scent of peppermint tea and lemon polish wrapped around me as she ushered me into her living room. Books lined the walls, spines faded but sturdy, much like her. We sat across from each other, my folders stacked between us like a barricade. She lifted the first folder, flipped it open, and scanned the papers without pausing. After a few minutes, she set it down and looked me square in the eye. You can't reclaim what you gave, she said, her voice cutting through the room, but you can stop bleeding out more. The words landed heavier than any insult I'd ever endured. They weren't cruel, they were exact, a diagnosis. I swallowed hard. So what am I supposed to do, pretend none of it happened? No, she said, you acknowledge it, and then you build walls where there were none, a fortress. Not to keep people out, but to keep yourself in. Because if you don't, they'll keep taking. Maybe not money next time, but time, energy, pieces of you, and you can't afford that anymore. I sat back, the chair stiff beneath me. No one had ever said it so plainly. For decades, people had called me generous, selfless, devoted. Alina called it what it really was, bleeding. She poured tea into delicate cups and pushed one toward me. Greer, you are not powerless. You're simply unused to your own power. Start with the basics, update your will, revoke any power of attorney you no longer trust, and decide where your assets will actually serve your heart. I stared at the steam rising from the cup. All I could think was how foreign the word power felt when applied to me. But there it was, hovering in the peppermint scent, daring me to claim it. I left her house with a list, neat bullet points written in Alina's careful script. They weren't just legal tasks, they were acts of reclamation. Each step was a brick in the fortress she told me I needed. Walking back to my car, I realized, for the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for someone else to protect me. I was considering what it meant to protect myself, not with bitterness, with boundaries. The first step was the bank. I stood in line at First Mutual, clutching a folder so tight my knuckles went white. My son's name was printed on every account, every card, every little corner of my financial life. Years ago, it felt practical, just in case something happens to me. Now it felt like a lock on my own cage. When the teller called me forward, I placed the folder on her desk and said words I never thought I would. I'd like to remove an authorized user. She clicked her keyboard, polite but detached. Name, my son, Keaton J. Marlowe. Saying it out loud made my stomach clench. For a moment, I half expected lightning to strike, some cosmic punishment for daring to reclaim what I'd given, but nothing happened. Just the sound of her typing and the quiet hum of the bank's printer. A few signatures later, the account was mine alone. Clean, whole. The next step was harder, revoking the power of attorney. That document had been meant as a gesture of trust, a safety net. After my fall a few years back, Eleanor had suggested I prepare one. I'd chosen Keaton without hesitation. He was my son, my only child. Who else would I trust to carry my decisions if I couldn't? But when I placed that paper on Eleanor's desk again, she didn't blink. "Do you want to cancel it?" she asked. I nodded. Her pen scratched across the form, swift and decisive. Then she slid it toward me. "Sign here, Greer." I signed. Each letter of my name felt like a stitch closing a wound I'd ignored for too long. The final step was the will. Eleanor guided me through the language, her tone firm but kind. Together we rewrote the lines that once named Keaton as executor, once left him every last thing I owned. I crossed his name out, not with anger but with honesty. Instead, I directed my modest estate to a women's shelter across town, the kind of place I wished had existed when I was young and scared and had no one to lean on. Still, guilt twisted inside me. What kind of mother protects herself from her own child? Wasn't motherhood supposed to mean unconditional trust, unconditional sacrifice? But then I remembered the backyard. The whisper, "Why is she even still alive?" That sentence, more than an illegal document, was the proof I needed. My love had been unconditional. Theirs had not. When I signed the new will, my hand didn't shake. My pen didn't hesitate. By the time Eleanor notarized everything, I felt strangely lighter, as if a weight I'd carried for decades had finally slid from my shoulders. Paperwork had never seemed sacred to me before. But that day, every signature was more than ink. It was an act of self-respect. A mother's love may be boundless, but her dignity cannot be collateral. The first knock came just after dinner. I had set my plate in the sink, wiped the counter clean, and was settling in with a cup of tea when the sound rattled through the door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was urgent, demanding. "Mom, open the door, we need to talk." Keaton's voice, my son. For a long moment I just sat there, my hand curled around the mug. The tea was still steaming, lemon and chamomile rising like a shield. I told myself not to move, not to fall back into the old reflex, to rush, to answer, to prove my loyalty with availability. The knock grew harder. "Mom, come on. This is ridiculous. You're making a mistake." I closed my eyes. I had heard those words in so many different forms over the years. "You're too sensitive. You're imagining things. You're overreacting." Always designed to shrink me back into place. Another knock, louder, a fist this time. "If you don't open up, I swear." He stopped short, but the threat hung in the air anyway. I set the mug down gently, so quietly even I could barely hear it. And then I sat back, still as stone. For years, I had filled silences with explanations, excuses, apologies. I had tried to soften every sharp edge, mend every tear before anyone noticed. But tonight, I let silence do the speaking. On the other side of the door, Keaton's voice cracked. "Mom, please, just tell me what's going on. Just say something." But I didn't, because I had said everything in casseroles, in checks, in babysitting hours, in every moment of my life given away like loose change. And when I whispered, when I asked for a smile, for a seat at the table, for acknowledgement, I was unheard. So now, my silence was not absence. It was presence. The knocking slowed. Finally, it stopped. I heard the sound of footsteps retreating down the porch, then the rumble of his car fading into the night. I picked up my journal, the leather cover worn from years of writing wishes and regrets. With a steady hand, I wrote, "If they cannot hear me when I whisper, they will hear me when I am quiet." The words bled into the page like truth long overdue. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without rehearsing what I might say if they finally asked me what was wrong. I no longer needed to perform, to plead, to justify. My silence had spoken, and it spoke louder than any apology I could ever give. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the world feels muted, washed in gray. I was folding laundry in the living room, the hum of the dryer steady behind me when I heard it, a knock. Not the pounding of desperation like Keaton's. Not the sharp, clipped rhythm of Tamsin's impatience. This was softer, almost unsure, like someone asking permission before stepping into a room. I opened the door and there she was. Harper, 16 years old, shoulders hunched against the drizzle, hair plastered to her forehead, hands buried in the sleeves of her hoodie. "Grandma," she said, her voice so small it nearly broke me. I stepped aside before she even asked, because I knew if I hesitated, she might run. She walked in, dripping on the mat, eyes darting around like she was trespassing in a forbidden place. We stood there in silence for a moment before she finally spoke. "I didn't know if you'd open the door." "I wasn't sure you'd knock," I said gently. Her lips trembled, and for a second I saw the little girl who once clutched my hand crossing icy sidewalks, her mittens too big, her trust so absolute. Now that trust had been trained out of her, replaced by fear. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "At the library when I walked past you. I saw you. I pretended I didn't because Mom was watching. I just wanted to belong." The words hit me harder than any insult ever could, because I recognized them. They were my own. How many times had I swallowed myself whole just to belong? How many times had I looked away from my own reflection because someone else told me I didn't fit? I didn't feel bitterness. What broke open in me wasn't anger, but recognition. She was me, 30, 40 years earlier, learning to shrink herself for approval, and I couldn't let her believe that was the only way to survive. "Harper," I said, my voice steady, "you don't need to apologize for wanting to belong, but don't ever apologize for belonging to yourself." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, embarrassed. I motioned toward the kitchen. "Come on, let's make this less miserable. I've got banana bread." We sat at the small table, slices warm and fragrant between us, the rain pattering on the window. At first she picked at hers, nibbling at the crust, but slowly she eased. She told me about school, about the English teacher who said 34 times in one lecture, about a boy who doodled superheroes in his math notes, about how she hated pretending she was fine when she wasn't. And I listened, really listened. Then I told her stories. About Keaton when he was her age, about how he once got his shoelaces tangled in the bike chain and cried until I carried him inside, both of us covered in grease. About the summer nights when we chased fireflies until our legs ached. About how belonging isn't something you beg for, it's something you build. The distance between us, the silence her parents had planted, began to crumble. Not with grand declarations, but with shared bites of banana bread and the kind of laughter that comes softly, like a door creaking open after years of rust. When she left, Harper hugged me tighter than she ever had before. "I'll come back," she said, almost like a vow. As I watched her walk down the driveway, head held a little higher, I felt something stir in me I hadn't allowed in years. Not hope exactly, but something sturdier, recognition that the story wasn't over. Not for me, and not for her. It was a Thursday morning when the knock came, lighter than Keaton's, less hesitant than Harper's. When I opened the door, I found 3 familiar faces framed by the sunlight. Miriam with her ever-present scarf, June balancing a basket of muffins, and Althea, tall and elegant even in her worn cardigan. "Hope you've got a teapot handy," June said, brushing past me as if she'd been invited. They were women from church, though not the sort who quoted scripture at you or tried to fix your soul in one sitting. They were women who had lived long enough to know that sometimes what you needed wasn't a sermon, it was company. We crowded into my kitchen, their voices filling the air before I had a chance to second-guess the mess on my counters. Miriam set out napkins, Althea found the cups without asking, and June placed the muffins in the center of the table as if they were an offering. We didn't talk about Keaton. We didn't talk about Tamsin. Not once did they tilt their heads and say, "So how are things with your family?" Instead, Miriam told a story about her grandson's driving test gone horribly wrong. June complained about the price of peaches in April. Althea recited a line of poetry she'd been carrying around in her head for weeks. And me, I laughed. Not politely, not because I was supposed to, but fully, loud and sudden, the kind of laugh that shakes something loose inside you. As the tea cooled and the muffins dwindled, I realized what was happening. These women weren't here out of duty. They weren't marking my name off some visitation list. They were simply present. They stayed. For years, I'd measured love by proximity to blood. I thought belonging meant earning my place at my son's table, no matter how far they pushed me to the edge. But here, in my own kitchen, with crumbs on the table and mismatched mugs in hand, I understood something I had ignored. Community isn't blood, it's presence. When they left, Althea hugged me tight and whispered, "We'll come back next week. Same time." I stood in the doorway watching them walk down the path, their shoulders brushing against one another, their laughter spilling into the air like music. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel peripheral. I felt chosen. The first time I saw it, I almost turned around. The building wasn't glamorous, just a cluster of red brick rectangles softened by climbing ivy. The sign out front read Willow Court Apartments, the paint fading but honest. 2 stories, no elevators, no fountains or polished lobbies. Just a row of mailboxes, a cracked sidewalk, and the faint sound of wind chimes from somewhere inside. But the moment the manager unlocked the door to Unit 1B, I felt something shift. 2 rooms, a small balcony with a view of a maple tree, creaky wood floors that groaned under each step. The kitchen was hardly bigger than my pantry, the counters scarred by years of use. And yet standing there, I realized it felt like mine. Not borrowed, not earned through sacrifice, not tolerated. Mine. This one just opened up, the manager said, handing me a set of temporary keys. Quiet neighbors. Mostly teachers and retirees. Good light in the mornings. I walked through slowly, tracing my fingers along the window frame, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Every imperfection seemed to whisper, "You can live here, you can breathe here." When she placed the lease in front of me, my hand hesitated over the pen. Fear coiled in my chest. Signing meant I was leaving more than a house. I was leaving a history. I was leaving the idea that family would one day call me home. But liberation is rarely comfortable. It is terrifying, jagged, unfamiliar, and still, my name flowed onto the page. I walked out with a copy of the lease and a new key in my palm. I held it tightly as if it might vanish. The brass was warm from the sun, and for the first time in years I felt the weight of possibility rather than the weight of obligation. Back home, I pulled out a stack of cardboard boxes and a black marker. One box I labeled Keep. Another Donate. A third Release. Sorting my possessions meant sorting myself. The casserole dish I had carried to so many gatherings, Keep, because it was mine before it became an offering. The drawer of children's drawings from Harper's early years, Keep. A reminder of love uncoached, unfiltered. The unopened holiday gifts from Keaton and Tamsin, perfunctory and thoughtless, Donate. Let them find use elsewhere. The collection of Christmas cards I had kept even when they stopped coming in return, Release. Love doesn't live in paper when it was never alive in person. Each item asked me a question. Do I strengthen you, or do I weaken you? And with every decision, my boxes grew, but my spirit lightened. By dusk, the living room was lined with stacks, the air sharp with the smell of dust and old tape. I stood in the doorway surveying the boxes and whispered aloud what I had never dared before. This is not loss, this is choosing. The apartment key pressed cool against my palm. For the first time in decades, I was not waiting for anyone to hand me a place. I had chosen one myself. The boxes were stacked by the door like silent witnesses, taped and labeled, waiting for their journey. I walked from room to room one last time, touching walls that had absorbed years of laughter and loneliness alike. Each corner carried echoes, Keaton's school projects taped to the fridge, Frank's boots by the door, my own footsteps pacing through sleepless nights. I wanted my departure to be more than hauling cardboard and shutting off lights. I wanted a goodbye, not the kind where you weep and cling, but the kind where you bow your head in gratitude and then lift it higher. So I cooked. I pulled out the old Dutch oven, the one with a chip in the enamel, and set broth to simmer. Carrots, onions, potatoes, all diced slow, steady, my knife keeping rhythm with the quiet. Bread dough, kneaded until my palms ached, went into the oven. The smell rose into every room as if the house itself were breathing with me one last time. There was no invitation, no waiting to see if a car would pull into the driveway. This meal was not for anyone else. It was for me. When the soup was ready, I ladled it into a bowl and set it on the table where Keaton once scribbled math problems and smeared peanut butter across the wood. The bread crackled as I sliced into it, steam curling like incense. I sat down alone, and for the first time in a long while the solitude felt sacred, not shameful. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, letting the warmth anchor me. I thought about all the meals I'd cooked for others who barely noticed, all the plates I'd set for guests who never thanked me. Tonight, there was no performance, no audience, just nourishment. When the dishes were rinsed and dried, I opened the drawer beside the table, slid in a folded note written in my neatest hand. This house taught me everything. Thank you. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't surrender. It was acknowledgement. This house had held my sacrifices and my growth. It had seen me break, and it had seen me rise. It deserved a proper farewell. I walked through each room one final time, letting my fingers trail along the walls. In the bedroom, I stood by the window where I used to wait for Keaton to come home. In the living room, I touched the spot on the rug where Harper once built towers of blocks. In the kitchen, I rested my hand on the counter, still warm from bread. Finally, I stood at the door, the key cool in my palm. I turned the lock, not as someone being pushed out, but as someone choosing to step forward. When I pulled the door shut, the click was soft, almost gentle. Behind me lay a house full of memories. Ahead of me lay an apartment, a balcony, creaky floors, and a life that was mine. I walked away, not as a victim leaving empty, but as a woman carrying herself whole. It had been 3 weeks since I turned the key in the lock of my new apartment. By then, the creaks of the floor had become familiar music. The maple tree outside my balcony had already begun to change with the season, and the silence no longer felt like absence, it felt like breathing. One afternoon, coming home from the market with a paper bag of apples and tea, I noticed something on the floor just inside my door. A white envelope slid under the frame. My name scrawled across it in handwriting I knew as well as my own. Keaton. For a long while, I stood holding it, the weight of the apples cutting into my arm, the envelope light as air but heavier than stone. I sat at the table, set the bag down, and slid a finger beneath the seal. The letter inside was uneven, the ink pressed too hard as if he had started and stopped a dozen times. Words of apology bled onto the page, clumsy and unsteady. I didn't mean it to go that far. I don't know why I let Tamsin speak for us. I should have been better, I should have. But even as I read, I could see the gaps. The apologies weren't whole. They circled, hesitated, avoided the center. They reached but never arrived. And strangely, that was all right. I didn't rip the letter in anger. I didn't frame it as some holy artifact of reconciliation. Instead, I folded it carefully, slid it into a drawer I had already labeled history. Not closure, not forgiveness. Just space. When Harper came by later that week, her hoodie sleeves still too long, her eyes brighter than before, I told her about it. She sat across from me at the table, chewing on the end of a pencil she'd brought for homework. "Are you going to write him back?" she asked. "No," I said. "Some things don't need endings, they just need to rest." She nodded, thoughtful in a way that made her look older than 16. "That makes sense," she said quietly. We spent the evening baking cookies, the letter forgotten in its drawer, while laughter rose from my kitchen as though it had been waiting all these years for us to invite it back. For the first time, I understood. Boundaries aren't walls of cruelty. They are doors you choose not to open, because peace matters more than performance. And peace, I realized, had finally come home to me. The tulips arrived first. Harper stood at my door with a bouquet wrapped in brown paper and a hand-drawn card tucked under her arm. 16, cheeks flushed from the brisk air, she grinned shyly as she held them out. The tulips were yellow, their stems still damp from the florist's bucket. "Happy birthday, Grandma," she said. "I didn't have money for a gift, so I made this." The card was simple, colored pencil lines forming a table set with 2 cups of tea and a vase of tulips. Across the top she had written, "You belong here." I hugged her tight, my throat catching, not from sadness but from a swell of gratitude I couldn't contain. By the afternoon, the apartment was alive. Miriam, June, and Althea bustled in with a pie that smelled of cinnamon and laughter that filled the air before their coats were even off. We sat around my little table, Harper with her tulips in a vase, June slicing the pie, Miriam fussing over the tea. The creaky floors complained under our chairs, but no one minded. We didn't take photographs to prove it happened. No one posted updates to show the world how well we were performing family. We simply sat. We talked. We stayed. It was my 74th birthday, but it felt more like my first. That night, when the last plate had been washed and the tulips stood tall on the counter, I opened my journal for the final time. The pages were crowded with my handwriting, pleas, prayers, confessions, decisions. But this entry was different. I wrote, "They once asked why I was still alive. Now I know, to remember my own name, to set my own table, to leave the door open for those who come with clean hands." I closed the journal and placed it gently in the drawer marked Keep. Outside, the maple tree swayed in the night breeze. Inside, my apartment hummed with the echo of voices that had chosen me. Harper's laughter, Miriam's steady wisdom, June's easy jokes, Althea's poetry. No revenge, no bitterness, just clarity. I was still alive, and finally I understood why. Life didn't hand me a perfect ending. I didn't get the picture-perfect family gathered around my table, but what I found was something truer, peace in my own skin, love in unexpected places, and the strength to draw boundaries without cruelty. They once asked, why is she even still alive? Now I know. I am alive to remember my own name, to set my own table, and to leave the door open only for those who arrive with clean hands and honest hearts. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to. Sometimes it's who shows up, who stays, who treats you as if you matter. So I'll leave you with this question. What does family mean to you, blood or presence? If this story touched you, I invite you to share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story that just might help you see your own life a little differently.